你们好，我是林嘉文. I'm Gavin Wood. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Substrate. So first I want to talk a little bit about how Substrate is different to some other competing solutions for doing decentralized technologies. So Substrate chains have four main differences with some of the alternative ways of creating decentralized applications. And I think it's very important to understand and really get to the bottom of what these four differences are. The first is that they are really built to be peer-to-peer. Secondly, upgradable. Thirdly, unlimited in terms of their logical flexibility. And fourthly, unlimited in terms of their economic flexibility. So let's break these down a little bit. Substrate-based parachains are really built to be truly peer-to-peer, truly decentralized. This is quite different to many, if not most, of the other leading supposed solutions out there. Many favor a hybrid centralized and decentralized approach, which gives overall greater amount of power to certain participants in the network over others. In effect, making it not peer-to-peer. This compromises both its security and, in some sense, the fact that it can operate at all under certain environments. With Substrate, it really is truly decentralized. The nodes on the network all have as much data as each other. Validators on the network all have as much permission to build the chain as each other. And for those who don't want to run a full node, with Substrate, uniquely there is a light client that can facilitate access to decentralized applications in a variety of relatively low resource environments, including the web browser and mobile. Secondly, Substrate chains are built to be upgradable. This is a key element of developability and of sustainability in the long term. It's all too easy to believe that an initial release of some software is the perfect release of the software and that no further changes will need to be made. But this is completely unrealistic and completely impractical. In reality, software needs to be upgraded throughout its substantial life cycle. And the only way to achieve this in a blockchain decentralized system is through a meta protocol, effectively a protocol that is the blockchain that handles business logic, engineered on top of another protocol that handles very basic levels of consensus. And it's only this way that Substrate allows its developers to be able to upgrade their applications, their chains, over time and with a minimum of effort, without having to go to things like hard forks. Now, Substrate is designed to be unlimited in two key different ways. Firstly, unlimited in terms of what your application can use the blockchain, the decentralized technology for. Now, Substrate has what's called a free execution model. This is crucially different to a transactive execution model that's favored by smart contract platforms like Ethereum. A free execution model allows you, the application developers, to decide what code runs and when it runs. If you want to use a block entirely for maintaining elements of your application, then you can simply require that block run logic of your determination. You don't need to rely on users in order to provide transactions that can then be interpreted by your application. Your users, in principle, don't have to compete with other applications' users to get that transactive logic to be executed. With Substrate, you are free for however long your time slice is, every 6 seconds, in order to allow for whatever logic needs to be run, and you can dictate that as an application developer. On-chain scheduling is possible, transactions, priorities is possible, ordering customizations of transactions are possible, feeless transactions are possible. In essence, the APIs on initialize and on finalize don't exist in a traditional smart contract environment, but they do exist in Substrate. Now, secondly, Substrate is designed to give economic freedom for you as a parachain builder. Now, the Substrate parachain model gives you the ability to allow you, the application developer, to determine how and when users should be able to use your application in the same way that you would get with traditional Web 2 user models. Effectively, this allows you to be free from your platform's mechanisms for determining and restricting user access, typically by requiring users to use tokens in order to use the platform, in order to use your application. With Substrate and Substrate's free execution model, you, as the application developer, get to determine whether it's through tokens or through some other mechanism, such as Oracle certificates, on-chain methods, off-chain identifiers, or whatever it is that you come up with in order to determine whether a user should be able to use your application, and for that matter, how often and when they should be able to use it. In principle, you can avoid all fees in the way that traditional Web 2 applications don't require fees to be paid for typical usage. Good. Now, those are the 4 points, and I think they are important to understand properly so that we are clear, all of us, about why it is that we're developing on this platform and what advantages the platform brings. The next thing I want to cover is status reports over a certain number of things within the Substrate ecosystem. The first thing I want to talk about is the bridges, the status of bridges. Now, for those of you who are not familiar, bridges is separate to the relay chain parachain communication model. Bridges is a low security intercommunication system, allowing independent solo chains to communicate with each other, although with the important realization that the chain with the lowest level of security will effectively be the one that governs the overall interaction, and therefore providing a high security chain bridging status to a low security chain could have significant security implications for that high security chain. Now, the bridges allows us to connect independent solo chains. We expect to be able to connect 2 notable test networks, the Rococo test network and the Wakoko test network, in the not too distant future, probably over the next few days, if not a couple of weeks. We have finalized the second audit of the bridges code. It's probably about 2 weeks from being finished, and we do expect it to be finalized in the very near future. There will, of course, be some corrections, but we do not expect very many. We expect relay-to-relay bridging between 2 value-bearing networks to be operational by the end of the year. Very exciting time for these 2 value-bearing networks, and bridging between the underlying parachains of these value-bearing networks, expected probably early next year, hopefully in the first month or 2. XCM, in terms of its status, well, XCM has been delivered, version 2. Version 2 brings a number of very important improvements, including an extensible virtual machine model. So XCM is now based upon the cross-consensus virtual machine, XCVM. There is a specification for this virtual machine. You can go and visit that in the XCM-format repository on GitHub. And XCM version 2 brings, amongst other features, version tracking, automatic version tracking. And this allows chains of differing versions of XCM to interoperate and communicate with each other without having to coordinate upgrades. In addition to this, there are asynchronous error handlers, allowing for errors that happen within the XCM message on one chain to be handled by code sitting in another chain, usually the sender chain. Status reporting, allowing the status of an XCM execution to be sent, reported to some other destination. Asset trapping and generic claiming system, allowing for the possibility of assets that are left accidentally or otherwise at the end of an XCM execution to be claimed at a later time. This, I hope, will ensure that assets that are valuable do not accidentally get lost or destroyed. And finally, exception handling, XCM, and the XCVM now has exception handling built into the machine at the lowest level, allowing for different code to run depending on whether an error happens, whether it doesn't happen, or in both cases. And the exception handling system can also be used to, in principle, introduce conditionals into XCM messages. In terms of the status of parachains, we're happy to announce that parachains, the Powerchain code in our code base is feature complete. It's considered that it has all necessary security features. Now, the audit is also complete for this code. There are a number of important corrections to introduce prior to this code being used for anything remotely production, but we do expect these corrections to be completed in the not too distant future, probably as it happens in the next few days, but we would expect early November at the latest. And we do expect this code to be deployed into a canary network, so a value-bearing network, in the very near future, probably in the next 1 to 2 weeks. We are reasonably confident, therefore, that parachains will be technologically viable from mid-December, probably from early December, and our confidence in this will, of course, be cemented by a deployment to a canary network in the next few days. So from a technological perspective, we don't think it's unreasonable for production chains to begin utilizing this code by the early to mid-December mark. Now, looking forward, I want to talk a little bit about where I see the industry going in the next year or so, and what I see as the driving currents for change to be. Now, one of the sort of very driving factors in our industry has been scalability, the search for high transactional throughput, high TPS numbers. And I think some teams have really lost sight of the fact that decentralization and security are not optional features here. This is not something that we can cut corners on. Parity has not lost sight of this, and we will be redoubling our efforts to ensure that our networks are decentralized and peer-to-peer to the maximum extent that is technologically possible. As we've seen, some of there have been currents of international regulation. There are policy documents available to read. What's fairly clear is that software development doesn't appear to be something which regulation is going to attempt to intervene with. I think from what I've read, software development still seems to be something, thankfully, that is reasonably well protected, as it seems is generic maintenance of a network, running generic nodes, although different jurisdictions vary, of course. There are a number of things, however, that have or are going on, and I think are probably not going to be viable in the long term due to regulation picking up. Most of these revolve around centralized elements of networks, and they range from things like centralized service provision, such as RPC servers, and you don't need to look too far to see centralized RPC servers like Infura running on Ethereum to see where these choke points of regulation could be. In addition to this, custodial wallets, application websites, decentralized application websites with a centralized web server behind them are all, I think, potential targets for regulation. In addition to this, multi-signature wallets, even like the treasury that exists on certain substrate-based networks, I think could be come under regulatory scrutiny. Custodian services, inevitably, hosted wallets, and non-peer-to-peer stablecoins, I think will have a harder time in the future. And even potentially what I would call easy fires or semi-centralized applications heavily based on decentralized technology, but with elements of centralized technology in order to facilitate user adoption and usage. I think these may also eventually find themselves under some degree of regulatory pressure. At Parity and with Substrate, we are committed to peer-to-peerifying everything, to decentralizing everything, and to do so at the ground level. So really fundamentally ensuring that these applications that you're building on this technology are going to be around for the long term. And this means a number of different avenues need to be decentralized, need to be hardened, and need to be innovated. Thankfully, we are already well on the road to doing that with these in this way. So the first is governance, and particularly with regards to some of the Substrate governance building blocks, we will probably need to find alternatives to things like the council. The council being effectively a multi-sig that has a large amount of control, though not absolute control, but nonetheless a large amount of influence over the course of its underlying blockchain, will probably need to be reconsidered, particularly with its relationship to the other module in Substrate, the Treasury. Light clients, in order to avoid RPC servers, effectively a very obvious choke point for any supposedly decentralized network, will need to be innovated, they'll need to be created, and they'll need to be made extremely performant in order to ensure that the user experience in decentralized applications is viable. In the same manner, a certain amount of bootstrapping, allowing new clients, new nodes on the network to determine where these early servers, these early nodes of the network are and connect to them, will need to be done in a way that is actually decentralized or piggybacks on pre-existing and considered relatively safe systems. And that's something that we'll be doing over this next 12-month period. And there will be other technologies as well in order to allow for nodes, when running on the network, to have a degree of privacy between each other, essentially for maximum levels of security, despite being decentralized. One thing that I would like to make clear is that solutions built on Substrate will be performant and truly Web3, secure and actually peer-to-peer. We're building some of the world's first truly peer-to-peer, secure, scalable, and free execution platforms. And I hope these are platforms that you will enjoy and benefit from using over the course of the next years. So that's it for now. With the end of the talk, I would like to leave you with a message, just to reiterate the 4 key tenets of the Substrate Powerchain platform, being truly peer-to-peer, upgradable, unlimited in terms of logical flexibility, and unlimited in terms of your economic flexibility. Thank you very much. 下一点。